Hey everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Mike's Deep Talks. This show is all about taking you on a journey of discovery. It doesn't matter what you're curious about. I'm Mike, and I'll be your guide. With me, as always, is Amber. Her superpower is connecting the dots and finding those aha moments.
I'm excited to be here. I love to explore and share.
Today we're stepping into a world that's both ancient and surprisingly relevant. The world of paganism. Whether you're a complete newbie or have already dipped your toes into paganism, we're going to uncover what makes it tick, explore the diversity, and answer the question, why should you care?
We'll be unpacking what pagan actually means today. It has evolved quite a bit. It all started with the Latin word paganus.
Paganus. That doesn't sound very mystical. What did it mean?
It simply meant villager or rural person. Imagine that. The word that now encompasses a whole spectrum of spiritualities. Once just referred to folks living out in the countryside.
So how did rural folk turn into pagan?
Well, as Christianity became the dominant religion in Europe, the term pagan started to be used to differentiate between those who followed the Christian faith and those who didn't.
So pagan became the label for everything outside the Christian norm.
Yeah, but it wasn't always used in the most respectful way. During the colonial era, pagan was applied very broadly, often incorrectly, to any non-Abrahamic religious practice.
So they lumped together ancient traditions like Hinduism and Native American spiritualities, even Shinto in Japan, all under this pagan umbrella.
Exactly, and that disregards the unique history, depth, and richness of these distinct traditions. It's like saying a daisy and a redwood are the same because they're both plants.
You wouldn't do that. So to be clear, our deep dive focuses on what we call modern paganism, not about those ancient continuous traditions, but a modern revival inspired by pre-Christian European practices. It blends these older traditions with contemporary values.
That's key. And one of the defining characteristics of modern paganism is its reverence for nature. It's all about honoring the earth, the seasons, the cycles of life and death. This is a core element across many pagan paths.
You know, that really resonates with me, this idea of feeling connected to the natural world, seeing it as sacred. That's something I think a lot of people are seeking.
Absolutely. There's a real yearning for a spirituality that recognizes the earth as something to be cherished.
Now, even within modern paganism, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. There's a whole spectrum of beliefs and practices. It's like a line, with New Age practices at one end and meticulously researched historical reconstructions at the other.
That's a great way to visualize it. On that spectrum, Wicca sits closer to the New Age side. It emerged in the UK in the 1940s and has become one of the most well-known forms of paganism.
Wicca, that's the one everyone's heard of.
Right.
It's all about witches, spells, magic.
It is tied to witchcraft, meaning ritualized magic. It often focuses on a goddess deity, sometimes with a god as well. And what's fascinating is how Wicca evolved in the US, becoming intertwined with social movements like the Green Movement and the women's rights movement.
So it wasn't just a spiritual path, it was connected to these bigger cultural shifts.
Exactly. It reflected and contributed to a changing social landscape. Now, even within Wicca, there's a lot of variety. You've probably heard the term kitchen witch.
It always sounded fun and approachable. What does it actually mean?
Think of it as a way of weaving magic into everyday life, making the mundane sacred. Then you have more traditionalist branches like Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca, with a stronger focus on occult practices.
Okay, so Wicca covers a pretty broad range. And then moving along our spectrum, we get to Reconstructionism, which emerged in the 1970s. What sets it apart?
Reconstructionists are like meticulous historical detectives. They dedicate themselves to reviving ancient pagan practices based on in-depth historical and archaeological research. They pore over ancient texts, archaeological findings, folklore, even linguistic patterns to piece together these lost traditions.
So they're trying to rebuild these ancient practices as authentically as possible.
Precisely. Think of groups like heathens, who are focused on Germanic cultures. Picture Vikings, Norse mythology, those epic tales of gods and heroes. And then there's Druidry, which delves into the Celtic world, ancient Ireland, Scotland, Wales, places steeped in myth and legend.
I can see the appeal. It's like connecting with the very roots of your heritage. But it's not just Wicca and Reconstructionism.
Right. Of course not. There are so many other expressions of paganism. Some people find a pagan connection through their reverence for nature within more modern religious frameworks, like the Unitarian Universalist Church.
So it's not always about adhering to a specific set of doctrines or rituals. It can be a way of seeing the world, a way of connecting with the sacredness of nature.
Yes. And while polytheism, the belief in many gods, is a common thread in paganism, the way it's practiced can vary widely. Some pagans honor specific pantheons of gods and goddesses, while others might have a more fluid understanding of the divine.
So there's a lot to unpack here, and that's exactly what we'll be doing in the coming weeks. Each week, we'll take a deep dive into a specific branch of paganism, giving you a chance to really understand its nuances.
We'll explore everything from the core beliefs and practices to the historical context and modern-day relevance.
Think of it as a multi-episode exploration. We're just scratching the surface today, laying the groundwork for our future deep dives. Consider this your Paganism 101.
Exactly. Whether you're brand new to this or you're looking to expand your existing knowledge, there's something here for everyone.
And sometimes we'll even throw in a bonus episode between our regular deep dives, just a little something extra.
We're all about those delightful surprises.
So stay tuned and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. And before we wrap up, I have a question. After hearing this introduction, what aspects of paganism stand out to you? What piques your curiosity? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.
It's all about sparking those conversations and diving deeper together.
Thanks for joining us on this first deep dive. We'll be back next week with a closer look at Wicca. See you then.
All right, are you ready to delve deeper into Wicca?
Absolutely. I'm especially curious about how a practice that's relatively recent, like Wicca, has captured so many people. What's the draw?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Wicca emerged when interest in esotericism and alternative spiritualities was blossoming. I think it taps into something primal, this connection to nature's power and magic.
We mentioned Gerald Gardner in the last part. He's often called the father of modern Wicca.
That's right. He brought Wicca into the public eye back in the 1930s, and the tradition that bears his name, Gardnerian Wicca, is still one of the most well-known branches.
So we also mentioned that Wicca isn't one unified religion.
Exactly. It's more like an umbrella term, encompassing numerous traditions and variations, each with its own unique practices and beliefs. For instance, you have Alexandrian Wicca, which developed alongside Gardnerian Wicca, but has its own distinct lineage and rituals.
So for someone completely new to this, what might they see if they were to peek into a Wiccan circle? What are some of the core elements that define this path?
Ritual is at the heart of Wiccan practice. Wiccans gather in circles for ceremonies that mark the cycles of the year, the phases of the moon, or other important events. These rituals often involve calling upon deities, working with magic, and using tools that hold specific symbolism.
Like what kind of tools?
Well, you might see an atham, which is a ritual knife used to direct energy, not for cutting physical objects, or a chalice representing the feminine principle, and often associated with the element of water. Each tool has a deeper meaning, woven into Wiccan practice.
So it's a blend of reverence for the sacred, with a very hands-on approach to working with energy.
Exactly. And remember how we talked about nature veneration being a cornerstone of paganism? Well, that's very much present in Wicca. Wiccans often incorporate elements of nature into their rituals, using herbs, flowers, stones, anything that connects them to the earth's energy.
And what about the deities? We mentioned that Wicca often focuses on a goddess, sometimes with a god as well. How does that play out?
It's interesting. Many Wiccans see the goddess and god as representations of the divine feminine and masculine energies that are present in nature and within each of us. They might honor specific goddesses and gods from different pantheons, or they might view the goddess and god as archetypal figures embodying universal principles.
So it's not necessarily about worshiping specific historical figures, but rather connecting with these powerful archetypal energies.
You got it. And this emphasis on the divine feminine is one of the things that really set Wicca apart. It resonated with the feminist movement, offering a spiritual path that honored women's power, wisdom, and connection to nature.
That makes a lot of sense. Now we can't talk about Wicca without addressing the elephant in the room. Magic. What role does it play in Wiccan practice?
Wiccan magic, or witchcraft, is about working with natural energies to bring about positive change. It's based on the idea that our thoughts, intentions, and actions have real power to shape the world around us.
So it's not about hocus pocus or trying to bend the laws of physics.
Not exactly. It's more about aligning yourself with natural forces and directing energy with intention. Wiccans might use spells, rituals, and visualizations to help them manifest their desires, heal themselves or others, or bring about positive change in their community.
It sounds like a very empowering practice.
Yeah.
So how does someone actually become Wiccan? Is there a formal process or is it more self-directed?
That's where it gets interesting. Some Wiccan traditions, especially the more traditional lineages like Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca, have structured initiation processes. You might study with a coven, a group of Wiccans, for a time before being formally initiated into their practices.
So it's a bit like an apprenticeship, learning from experienced practitioners.
Yes, exactly. But there are also many Wiccans who practice as solitaries, meaning they learn and develop their own practices through reading, research, and personal exploration.
So there's no one right way to be Wiccan.
Right. Wicca emphasizes personal experience and a direct connection to the divine. So the path is very individual. Some might feel called to the structure and community of a coven, while others thrive on the freedom and independence of solitary practice.
That makes sense. But with all this variation, it must be tricky for someone new to know where to begin.
It can be. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation and sensationalism about Wicca, especially in pop culture.
Yeah, you've got movies and TV shows portraying witches as evil villains or glamorous supernatural beings, neither of which really reflects Wiccan practice.
Exactly. Wicca is a nature-based spirituality. It emphasizes personal growth, ethical living, and reverence for all life. It's not about gaining power over others or pursuing supernatural abilities. It's about cultivating a deeper connection with the earth and the divine, and using that connection to make a positive difference.
So where would you recommend someone who's genuinely interested start? Are there books, groups, resources you'd point them to?
Absolutely. There are some excellent books that offer a solid foundation. Scott Cunningham's Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, is a classic. And Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft is another great resource.
And for those looking for a more hands-on experience or community, what are their options?
There are Wiccan groups and covens in many cities and towns, and online communities can also be a great way to connect. The key is to do your research. Find groups that resonate with your values, and approach it all with an open mind and a respectful heart.
Remember, this is just a taste of what Wicca is all about. We'll be diving deeper into specific traditions, practices, and ethics in future episodes.
For now, what we really want you to take away is this. Wicca is a vibrant and evolving path that honors the power of nature, the divine feminine, and the magic that exists within each of us.
It's a path that invites us to connect with our own inner wisdom, live in harmony with the earth, and use our power for good.
Who knows? Maybe this deep dive has sparked a little something in you. Maybe it's time to explore this path for yourself.
Now let's shift gears a bit and journey to the other end of the spectrum, where we'll uncover the fascinating world of Reconstructionism. Okay, so we've explored Wicca with its emphasis on nature, the goddess, and ritual magic. But remember, Wicca is just one point on that spectrum of modern paganism. Now we're heading to the other end, into the world of Reconstructionism. I have to admit, this is the part that really intrigues me.
I can see why. Reconstructionism is especially fascinating for those drawn to history, archaeology, and the idea of reviving ancient traditions. It's like stepping back in time and reconnecting with the spiritual practices of our ancestors.
It's almost like a giant puzzle,
Right.
trying to piece together how people practice their spirituality before Christianity, using fragments of information scattered across time.
Exactly. Reconstructionists are like meticulous detectives, researching historical texts, archaeological findings, folklore, and even linguistic patterns. To gain insight into the beliefs and practices of pre-Christian cultures, they approach it with a deep respect for the cultures they're studying and a commitment to authenticity.
So let's dive into some specific examples. We briefly touched on heathenry and druidry earlier. What can you tell us about those paths?
Let's start with heathenry. This path focuses on the pre-Christian beliefs and practices of the Germanic peoples. Think Vikings, Norse mythology, those epic tales of gods and heroes found in the Eddas and sagas.
So heathens honor deities like Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki, those iconic figures from Norse mythology. I can definitely see the appeal. People drawn to strength, courage, and a connection to their ancestral heritage. What would their practices look like?
Their practices often involve rituals, storytelling, feasting, and some even incorporate martial arts, reflecting the warrior culture of the Vikings. They strive to connect with the values and worldview of their ancestors.
That's pretty cool. Okay, now what about druidry? What makes that path unique?
Druidry takes us to the Celtic world, to the ancient lands of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Brittany. They're all about reverence for nature, seeing it as sacred and interconnected. They honor the cycles of the year, the wisdom of trees, and the power of the elements.
I can totally picture it. Rituals held outdoors in natural settings, maybe involving chanting, drumming, working with the energies of the land. It seems very earthy and mystical.
You're getting the picture. Many Druids also study Celtic mythology, folklore, and herbalism as part of their practice, seeking to tap into the wisdom of their ancestors.
We've talked about heathenry and druidry, But I imagine there are other Reconstructionist paths as well.
Oh, absolutely. For example, there are groups dedicated to reviving the traditions of ancient Greece and Rome. They might hold festivals honoring the Olympian gods, practice divination techniques like astrology and augury, and study the philosophical works of figures like Plato and Aristotle.
So it's not just about recreating rituals. It's about understanding the whole world view, the philosophy, the way our ancestors thought about the world and their place in it.
Exactly. Reconstructionism is about going beyond just the outward forms and trying to grasp the heart and soul of these ancient traditions. They ask, how can these ancient ways of being inform our lives today?
This might seem like a silly question, but do Reconstructionists actually believe in these ancient gods and goddesses? I mean, it's one thing to study mythology, but it's another to actually see them as real, living beings.
That's a great question, and it gets to the core of what it means to be a Reconstructionist. There's no single answer. Some Reconstructionists might view the gods and goddesses as literal supernatural beings, while others might see them as archetypes, representations of powerful forces or energies.
So there's room for individual interpretation and understanding.
Definitely. Reconstructionism emphasizes personal experience, direct revelation, and building a relationship with the divine, based on one's own understanding.
Now I have to ask, with this focus on historical accuracy, does that mean Reconstructionism can sometimes be a bit rigid? If you're trying to reconstruct something from the past, how much room is there for adaptation or personal interpretation?
That's a common misconception. While authenticity is important, Reconstructionists also recognize that we're living in a different time and place, and some adaptation is necessary. It's not about blindly mimicking the past. It's about taking those ancient principles and values and finding ways to make them relevant to our lives today.
That makes sense. It's like taking an ancient recipe and adapting it with modern ingredients and techniques, while still honoring the original spirit of the dish.
Exactly. And it's an evolving process as new archaeological discoveries are made. And we delve deeper into historical texts. Our understanding of these ancient traditions continues to grow. Reconstructionism is about ongoing discovery.
Well, this has been an incredible journey into Reconstructionism. It's amazing how much depth and complexity there is, and how it can challenge us to think differently about history, spirituality, and our connection to the past.
And remember, this is just the beginning of our exploration of paganism. We'll be diving deeper into specific paths, practices, and ethical considerations over the coming weeks.
So if you've enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to subscribe to Mike's Deep Dives so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. We release new episodes every week, and sometimes we even drop a bonus episode in between.
Consider it a little gift.
Exactly. In the meantime, if this has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to do your own research and see where your own exploration leads you. The world of paganism is rich and diverse, and there's a path out there for anyone seeking a deeper connection with nature, the divine, and the magic of the ancient world.
It's been a pleasure diving into this with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those minds open.